The UN says at least 50 people have been killed since demonstrations began in February. How can Myanmar restore its duly elected government? We discuss in this episode of the Chiefs. Welcome to this special edition of the Chiefs. With me right here on set is Ed Lingao of One News, and also with us is Ami Pamatuan of the Philippine Star, joining us from the port area in Manila.
Hi, Ami. Happy Monday.
Now,
medyo muffled yung mga salita nyo dyan sa face shield nyo
Oh, ganun ba?
Bakit naka-face shield ngayon?
But we have to follow protocols. Alam nyo naman po, there's a real surge and it's really serious for all of us. So starting today, we here in One News and in News 5, we will be following all the health protocols also to encourage everybody and to remind everybody, mask on. Okay, now...
May naka-mask na start. Pero yun ang sabi ng Department of Health, no? That's the big news na hindi naman daw necessarily the variant. Kundi mukhang lax compliance na. Well, nagre-relax na tayo.
Yeah, but whatever the case is, the numbers are alarming kasi. They have been growing, and the projections of Octa Research indicate that it will grow further.
Yes.
Yes. Nagiging complacent siguro tayo dahil sa pagdating siguro ng vaccine.
Yeah.
And natin tapos na.
And we'll go deeper into COVID discussions as we always do. But for now, we'll actually start with what we introduced earlier. We'll go straight to our guest because we don't have that much time with him. But we are joined by Special Envoy to the United Nations of the Committee representing the Union Parliament of Myanmar, Dr. Sasa. Good evening, Dr. Sasa.
Good evening,
Doctor.
Yeah. Mr. Sasa, we won't ask you where you are right now, but we will ask you, maybe give us a quick update on how is Myanmar doing right now? What is the situation in Yangon and in the rest of the country?
It's deeply chaos. The people of Myanmar, my people, are living under fear, under siege by illegal and illegitimate regimes of the military. And even today, they have killed some 5 people already. And it's total 60 people been killed who are peacefully protesting, just asking for their freedom, their democracy. And they just there peacefully. My people are peaceful people. But now we have got these military generals who are supposed to protect the people from any kind of acts of terrorism. But now they are acting terrorism against the people of Myanmar.
Okay. Now, Dr. Sasa, again, just by way of background, Filipinos are very much interested in what's happening in Myanmar, but just so we understand the context also, what is the committee representing the Union Parliament of Myanmar? We know that the country right now is in the grips of the military junta. What is the committee, particularly this committee that appointed you as envoy to the United Nations?
On the 1st of February, it was the day when the new sections of Parliament of Myanmar are to take place. But the military junta, they come by guns and weapons and stop the parliamentarians to enter into the building and surrounded all the parliamentarians' building with smoky guns. And they arrest them and they put them into lockup. And that very moment, this brave and decisive member of parliament, elected by the people of Myanmar, for the people of Myanmar, bravely set up together and hold the sections in their prison cells. And they formed the committee representing the parliaments of Myanmar. And that is the parliaments of Myanmar that I'm representing to United Nations and to international communities around the world. It was the elections 8th of November 2020 when my people, 36 million voters, went to elections and elect a representative democratically free and fair, but that result of elections was stolen by guns, by smoky guns and gunpointers. Now our leaders, including our president, President Ong-Lim, our state councilor, our leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, are being detained illegally and unjustified.
Dr. Sasa, well, just to be clear, because Filipinos may not be that familiar with your system, we don't have a parliament here, we have a Congress, which is a bit different. So in other words, you represent the members of your parliament, especially those who have been put in jail by the military leaders of your country.
Yes, that's correct. It's like a House of Congress and House of Senators. The same, there's a lower house and upper house in the parliament. So I am representing both upper house and lower house of the parliament. Both of the parliaments, lower house of parliament and upper house of parliaments are called union parliament as together.
But I also understand that I think a third of parliament is composed of military appointees or military officials. Is that correct? And how does that play into the whole thing?
The military generals are determined to control the politics of Myanmar by drafting the constitution that is known as 2008 constitutions. They have drafted the constitution for 20 years. The constitution promised the military generals the ultimate autonomy and the veto power on the politics. And that constitutions promise the interest of the generals, not interest of the people. So according to their constitutions, that is the big problem in Myanmar and my country. So in that constitution, they guaranteed 25% of the seats in the House of Parliament, both in lower house and in upper house. That means that always there will be not elected member of parliament, 25% from the army generals. And they will be appointed by commander-in-chief of the generals army, the army of Myanmar. And at the same time, their constitutions promise Minister of Defense has to always be general, and Minister of Home Affairs always have to be general. Again, Minister of Border Affairs has to be always general, and then one vice president has to be general. So that means they gave themselves 4 cabinet ministers out of 10 ministers of cabinet, including the 25% of member of parliament and commander-in-chief of the army generals. So that means that everything they have taken away from the people of Myanmar, according to the constitution that they have created.
Dr. Sasa, our latest report today from your country is that trade unions are calling for a general strike. You think this will push the junta to, well, the generals to loosen up their hold on the government, or you think it will lead to a greater crackdown?
Well, we have no choice because we don't. Its situation is to live or to die. Because if we do not do it, we will die it. So it's a very serious situation in my country because none of us, when we live under the military boot again, and that oppress us, that cause us the maximum pain and suffering on the 54 million people of Myanmar. That means enough is enough. None of
The generals, did he freeze? Dr. Sasa?
I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think we lost our signal with Dr. Sasa.
Yep, we lost the signal. Pero ang gulo-gulo nga mga 50 na yung patay sa kanila eh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they really don't have, I mean, as he said, they feel like they don't have a choice right now. I think what he was saying was the answer to your question was sort of both. It tries to put pressure on the military junta. At the same time, they know that this junta has a very brutal track record. They do not brook any protest, whether it's peaceful or not. They have a history of violent reprisal and reactions to even peaceful protests. So it really is a risky move. But on the other hand, as he said, he essentially is representing, the committee is basically representing the elected parliament who were not allowed to take their oath on February 1st.
At saka, recently naman, well, in the past years, medyo nag-open na rin yung generals to reform, I think under pressure, no? From the international community. So, matanong sana natin because that is his designation. He will be working with the UN sana.
Yeah, but that's the big question, di ba? Because remember, the history of Myanmar is they were led by a military government for a long time. The whole time that the world was celebrating Aung San Suu Kyi, the reality was NLD, her party, was not and was not allowed back into mainstream politics until such point that the international community did eventually recognize the military junta and took that path for a very, very slow return to democracy, and now we're back to
Sudden
that.
regression. More than a month ago, sudden regression. With the military taking over, saying that they will hold a free and fair elections after the state of emergency is over, whenever that is, and claiming that the elections had been rigged. It does sound familiar, no? Parang pinastik.
Landslide eh.
Exactly.
Kapag landslide eh, rigged. Paano pag nag-landslide ulit? Rigged uli yan ang problema.
Well, kung mag-landslide in their favor, baka hindi na siya rigged.
Hindi, pero tama yung point mo, Ed, kanina, di ba?
Yan ang
Parang,
rigged.
yung landslide, that is after, that is on top of the military already having reserved seats for them.
Yeah, reserved seats.
Yeah.
What was the number again? Was
Something
it
like a third
thereabouts?
of parliament, and
Yeah.
despite that, basically NLD basically swept the remaining seats. So parang baliwala lang din yung ano nyo. And the thing is, this is the second time that that essentially watered down yung reserved seats nila. So talagang frustrated sa politics yung ano, and I guess you could say hindi sila sanay sa being on the weak side.
Yeah. I was kind of hoping to ask him, though. If the word that's getting out of Myanmar is complete in the proper context, or are there things that we're missing out on? Is there nuancing that we're missing out on?
Yeah.
Are there details that we have not? Are there details that are overplayed and underplayed and so on down the line?
Kasi nga, siya nga daw, di ba, nag-posing lang siyang taxi driver para makatakas. They cannot even tell us. May mga kaibigan ako dyan dating, malaki na rin ang pinagbago ha. May mga kaibigan ako yung journalist eh. They used to be unable to even receive, magazines from abroad. Hindi sila nakakaano nun. Tapos, ang access lang nila nun sa internet, they have to go to foreign embassies para sa maka-internet. And then, if they're going to leave the country, last minute, bago ka ibigay yung passport mo. So until the last minute, you are never sure kung makakaalis ka, especially if may suspicion sila na you are a supporter of Aung San Suu Kyi. So ganyan kahirap. Kaya malaki na rin ang pinagbago. So it's very disappointing na nag-backslide sila.
What I wanted to ask was, how does he see the response of the international community and particularly of ASEAN? Because countries, including here in the region, have spoken out, at least to the point of saying, "Uy, recognize the elections." But in terms of recognizing the government, there has been no actual, strongly worded position not to recognize. So in the meantime, you have a de facto situation in Myanmar. So that's what I wanted to ask also.
And as it is, that's ASEAN already. And ASEAN is notorious for ASEAN is notorious for keeping its hands off
Very conservative.
member states.
Very conservative.
But in the case of Myanmar, salita ang ASEAN. Okay, I think it's back. I think it's back. So,
Dr. Sasa?
Dr. Sasa, can you hear us now? Dr. Sasa?
Wala pa rin.
Connecting to audio pa. Connecting pa lang. Nagsalita ang di ba? Especially the Philippines. Dahil I think at that time tayo yung chair. Yung revolve, may hawak ng revolve. Dr. Sasa, can you hear us? Dr. Sasa? Ayan na yata.
Yes, I'm sorry that I have got a problem with this
Yes.
via internet connections, and I do apologize for inconvenience.
It's okay, sir. We understand
Yes.
completely.
Yes. Dr. Sasa, well, I can't remember where we stopped, but we want to know since you are envoy to the United Nations, what sort of assistance have you received so far, and are you happy with it? From the
So far, we are
community.
we are in the stage of just really advocating and lobbying international community to recognize with the people of Myanmar November 8 elections of 2020, so that our that was legitimate, it was legal and free and fair democratically elections. That means the international community must reject and denounce these illegal and illegitimate military regimes. So our goal is international community to recognize, not only just recognize us, but also help us and stand together with the people of Myanmar. That means that we are going to form interim government in coming days. There will be national unity government. That will be by the people of Myanmar, for the people of Myanmar. So we want all of our Asian friends like Philippines and other countries around the world to stand with democratically elected government. Never again with this military junta. Back to the power by guns and weapons, poisons and torture, forced labor things. So we are asking international community to recognize that.
Dr. Sasa, how would you assess, you mentioned ASEAN, how would you assess the response of ASEAN and the individual countries right now?
It has been some very unfortunate. Again and again, some of our Asian friends are continue to stand with the military junta, which is illegal and illegitimate. It's not the will of the people of Myanmar. So all our Asian friends, we are calling them to stand with the people of Myanmar, not again with illegitimate and illegal military-led governments. That means that some of the country, again, they think that it's internal problem. No more internal problem. It is already a regional problem. In a family, we are 10 people living together. If one is behaving bad, killing its own people, declare the war on its people, that means that the 9 friends, the 9 family members have the responsibility to protect the children of that persons who is killing own children. It's very simple. It's very common sense. So we are asking all the country in ASEAN, our friends, our dear neighbors, to please stand with the people of Myanmar, not again with this illegitimate and illegal military council.
But we have some experience with the exiled government, prior to the reform age that allowed the NLD back into mainstream politics in Myanmar. And if we look back at that history, we were discussing it earlier. ASEAN, as you know, is very conservative. We work by consensus. It works very, very slow. The member countries have gone as far as to say that the elections should be respected, but as you said, not a categorical backing of the elected parliament as the real government. What is the implications beyond Myanmar, given our history in ASEAN of slow-moving, move by consensus, the ASEAN way, and so on? Beyond Myanmar, what is the implications for ASEAN if, as you said, this family does not take a position on this particular trouble in Myanmar?
This is very simple. These military generals, they are in any country, Asia or Myanmar, it doesn't matter, really. They are putting ASEAN into shame in front of the world. That means that we cannot effort by this small number of people putting ASEAN into shame on the stage of the world. It's 21st century. The people must realize that it's no time for words, it's time for actions. That means that if we are going to behave like that again and again, no one in the world is going to respect us, ASEAN, anymore. I think we cannot afford to lose the respect that we need to have as ASEAN country. That means that we have to make decisive actions when necessary. Whenever there's emergency, we have to act quickly and immediately, not waiting and seeing what happened. So I think that this is putting ASEAN, taking ASEAN backwards. If we have got stable neighbor and prospering neighbor and thriving neighbor, that's much better to have than this kind of military generals who are killing its own people. This is a criminal act. It's a crime against humanity. It's not just something went wrong. It is about crime against humanity. So unfortunately, these generals of military regime has committed crime against humanity times and times again. 1962, they have committed the same crime against humanity. 1988, they have committed crime against humanity. Again, 1997, once with the students. Again, in 2007, with the monk. Killing the monks on the street is a crime against humanity. And with Rohingya people, yeah, in 2017, they have pushed almost 1 million people to the sea and killed many of them. Now it's happening again. So ASEAN has the responsibility to come to stand where the truth is. So they cannot stand again and again covering these generals who have committed crime against humanity. If they still stand with them, they will be blamed in history. The history will judge us harshly.
Well,
Doctors,
go ahead.
go ahead.
Okay. Well, Doctor, we are at a disadvantage in that we always have to wait for information to filter out of Myanmar. Can you tell us, are we getting the full picture? Or are we getting an accurate picture of what's happening in Myanmar? Or are there things that we are not hearing or not seeing that we should be seeing? Are there stories that should be played some more? Are there stories that are underplayed or overplayed? Can you give us an idea?
I mean, right now, the problem is that 54 million people are living under fear in my country, Myanmar. And secondly, today it can be the day when they will kill me. Yeah, today can be the day when my mom will be arrested. Today can be the day when my dad will be arrested. Today's the day. Today may be the day when my daughter, my brother, my sister will be killed. So it's like the smoky guns in the doorsteps. They are pointing and on the high, and they are doing this. Even snipers on the high, aiming to kill, shoot to kill. So I mean, all the country are under siege. As I said, they turned the country into chaos. That means that our neighbors, our friends, our family, we are the family. ASEAN as 10 members, we are 10 members of the family. And this is happening. It seems to us that our neighbors, our friends, our family members are closing their eyes so that they will not see it, and closing their ear so that they will not hear it. So the people of Myanmar are crying and dying. So I think it's the time for our neighbor and the world to hear the voice of the suffering of the people of Myanmar.
Just one last question. The generals are proposing that they will hold elections after they lift the state of emergency. Is that acceptable to you?
It's meaningless. We don't need another election. We already have free and fair and democratic elections on the 8th of November 2020. So asking for another election is stupid and crazy and unacceptable, is unjustified. And again, it's illegal, it's illegitimate. Because we already have legitimate elections. We already have legal elections under the constitution created by the generals themselves. So they cannot afford to lose in elections because they lost heavily on election with their proxy parties that they have formed under the military generals. That means that they just like to get into power again and again. So they produce 10.4 million voter list frauds. They allege those lists, we don't know where they came from. We don't know where they produce. There's no evidence of the voter frauds. International observer, a local observer of election, all stated that it's all free and fair and democratic. That means that they just use those produce. They have manufactured 10.4 million voters frauds. Maybe for military battalions, they print a lot of paper. The generals or the commanders or the major or the captains, they are not election officer by any way. They are just military with the guns. That means that they have nothing to do with elections. That means that they produce election list. We never know from where it came. Maybe it came from their local commanders or the battalions. They manufacture from their fake machinery. And now they are using that as a weapons to kill the people, to prison the people. Yeah, that is completely unacceptable, and serious violation of human rights and abuse of human rights have been taking place across the nations. So we again call on international community to act quickly and decisively, especially for our ASEAN friends. This is the time that they have to act. If they do not act this time, again, I believe history will judge us harshly.
Okay. Dr. Sasa, the envoy to the United Nations of the committee representing the Union Parliament of Myanmar. Jesu Tenbade. Jezebel, Dr. Sasa.
Jesuba, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We just need to take a break. The Chiefs will be right back.
The research team is reporting an accelerated surge of COVID-19 infections in Metro Manila. This as the nationwide caseload reached the 3,000 mark for the third consecutive day.
Right now we're seeing about 3,000 cases on average, and it appears that if the trend continues, we'll be at around 4,000 cases, I believe, by next week. And if the trend continues still, then we will be approaching 5,000 to 6,000 cases per day in the whole country by the end of this month, based on the again the projected reproduction number. So we're not saying that this is what will happen. What we're saying is, if the trend continues and we do not reverse it, this is what will happen.
The number of COVID-19 cases in the country is on the uptick yet again, as confirmed by the Health Department. But the agency maintains that granular or localized lockdowns on top of current health measures will do for now.
Alam po natin na ang stricter lockdowns or region-wide lockdowns are really not the only measures for us to prevent the further transmission of this disease.
Welcome back to the Chiefs here on One News. We are now in the final stage of our conversation, and now joining us is pediatric infectious diseases specialist Dr. Ong-Lim of the DOH Technical Advisory Group. She's also a member of the IATF's Technical Working Group on COVID variants, as well as the Health Professionals Alliance Against COVID-19, or HPAC. Doc, good evening and welcome back.
Good evening.
Yes, Doc. Well, Doc, the numbers appear to be alarming. Kita nyo nga, bigla kaming napa-face shield ulit dito sa studio. But tell us what really is the picture that's emerging. Kasi we understand from the DOH na mukhang hindi raw variant-driven itong numbers. It's more daw of carelessness-driven, or being so complacent by the population. Does that really make sense? Does that make sense? Is that really the reason for this significant increase in the numbers?
I think we need to review the statement that was given by Yusek Perhere, I don't think she said naman na it's not variant driven. From what I understand, she was being very careful to attribute it entirely to the variant. Kasi kung titignan natin yung numbers, and we're looking at the same numbers, di ba? Their team is the one sharing it to us. Yung numbers of the numbers of positive cases attributed to the variants are actually less than 5% total. So paano naman natin sasabihin na yun lang ang pinaka-problema? Pero I think what we need to consider is that the fact that you pick it up means it's there. You may need to be able to prove that it's really the thing that's driving it. Pero regardless whether it is the driver or not the driver, you end up with the same intervention that needs to be done. So parang moot actually yung point, di ba?
Yeah. Ay, Doctor, I think, kasi kanina tinanong ko rin to kay Secretary Vince Dizon eh. And you're absolutely right. When it comes to the individuals, wala namang magbabago eh, di ba? Parang doesn't really matter kung ano yung source, kung ano yung variant, it's the same practice. But I think people are asking what's really driving this because it's on the level of government response, particularly on the level of restrictions, on GCQ ba tayo? Do we go back to a harder lockdown? That's where people want to see some adjustment because while we keep reminding people, best practice, best practice, best practice, government keeps saying, let's open up, let's open up, let's open up. And so there lies the dissonance that I think people are trying to understand. And so that's why they want to see how legitimate is it that it is the variance that is driving this, because our best practices brought down the numbers in December. Di ba? If you ask the people, it looks like people have been complying.
So those are really good points, no? And siguro because I am external to the Department of Health and taking this all from the health lens as a clinician and a pediatric infectious disease specialist, syempre ang perspective ko is always kung pwedeng maging mas strict in terms of movement, bakit naman ako hihindi? Bakit ako aayaw? Kasi gano'n naman ng aming perspective eh, pagka nakakakita kami ng any other outbreak in any other setting, gusto namin i-contain bilang healthcare professional. The thing is, the decision is really in the hands of the IATF. We can only make recommendations. And I think yung pinag-iingatan lang naman talaga siguro from the group, the variance group, is to make sure that when we make a recommendation, there has to be, or rather when we make that report, there has to be a really good basis to say, talagang sigurado kami na itong pagdami ng kaso is can be attributed primarily to the variants. We just don't have that kind of information yet. Now, having said that, there's nothing stopping us from acting in our individual capacities as if the variants are the ones driving this, and to be extra careful about making sure that we protect ourselves and our families.
Doctor, since the possibilities there, and seeing how this variant is behaving, it's really mukhang highly transmissible. Isang pamilya daw nag-party lang eh. Namatay na yung isa, yung iba nagkahawa-hawa. So you think granular lockdowns will actually work? Kasi yung ibang mayor sabi nila, pambihira na hawa lang kami kasi lumalabas yung mga tao sa city namin. You think the granular lockdowns, I mean meaning streets lang or houses lang will work? Or would you think, considering how this is behaving, mas madali siguro kung by city or by district siguro in the city, mas wider lockdowns will work?
Yung kasing granular lockdowns were actually part of the initial set of recommendations bago tayo sara ng todo nung March, even at that time, nung simula pa ng mga lockdowns. Kasi syempre, there was always this concern about how you would implement itong mga small areas. Kasi nga parang ang daming kailangan magbantay di ba? Kung maraming binabantayan, kailangan mo rin ng mas maraming tao. The hope really is actually to be able to preserve some kind of freedom of movement for those areas who are not affected But at the same time, identify yun yung mga talagang mas maraming kaso. Hopefully, we will be able to contain using this strategy. But I think everybody knows na pag hindi ito magwo-work, wala naman tayong choice. Uuwi na naman tayo dun sa larger scale. And I don't know that anybody wants that anymore, to be very frank. Diba?
Ang problema, di ba, I think one problem ngayon na wala nung December is we now have the vaccine. And meron tayong dito, syempre, I think it's unavoidable perception natin. Ay, salamat, matatapos na rin to. We can relax our compliance with the protocols. Bumababa na yung maskara, di ba, yung mga face shield, nawawala na. You think, what can we do to improve compliance, considering the rollout of the vaccine?
You know, Ami, what really scares me about this increase in cases, this is not the first time this has happened, di ba? We warned against this in December. We actually had a similar situation in July and August. Pero if you look at people's behavior, you're exactly correct. People are more, I don't know, maybe they behave like they're less scared. I think that's what really gets me. Parang nawala yung takot. Kasi nasanay na tayo lahat eh. Nakalampas na tayo ng 1 taon, okay pa naman tayo. Siguro may mga pamilya na hanggang ngayon hindi pa natatamaan. No? So that particular perception that we're going to be okay anyway, I feel is our main enemy at this point.
Yeah.
And I feel like we really have to keep on reminding people that that virus is still out there. And if it's really true that we pick up more and more of the variants, then this is going to be a worse enemy than it was in July or August. And we really have to be very, very vigilant to be able to get ahead of this particular variant, and protect ourselves and our communities.
Doc, I wanted to touch on what you said, no? Yung message na okay pa naman tayo di ba? Okay naman tayo. Part of what's being framed as okay pa naman tayo ngayon is that we've recaptured and revived a lot of the capacity of hospitals, no? And this is coming from LGUs and government and saying na, look, yung capacity naman natin, ganito ulit mababa pa rin naman yung percentage ng but is there anything to qualify on the capacity of our hospitals right now, especially given that OCTA is saying we might be seeing 6,000 cases a day by the end of March. And not only that, if I heard right, 50% of those cases, they are now projecting to be outside of NCR. And 50% na lang yung dito sa NCR. So is there anything to qualify on hospital capacity at this point?
You know, I think one of the differences also is that nung nagsimula tong pandemic, di ba, konting ubo, konting lagnat, konting sipon, people were really... Ngayon, dahil medyo nakita na ng mga tao by experience na kaya naman pala nito sa bahay. Pwede naman pala ako magpagaling by myself. Pwede akong magpahinga lang tapos gagaling ako. So maybe that's one of the reasons why the capacity isn't as stressed now as it was before. And people are more willing to perhaps just not self-medicate, but maybe recuperate at home. Maybe that's the way to put it, no? So siguro yung demand for hospital admissions was not as great compared to previously. And actually, ganun nga yung gusto nating sabihin. Kasi di ba, we keep citing this statistic na karamihan naman ng mga kaso will be mild. It's only those who are moderate to severe who need to be admitted. So hopefully, no, kung ganun na at natuto na talaga yung mga tao to only seek hospital admission if their conditions warrant it, then sana nga, ma-preserve natin yung hospital capacity natin para ma-reserve natin siya for those who really need it. But then, hindi naman ibig sabihin na kailangan magpabaya na tayo kasi karamihan naman pala mild di okay lang. No? Hindi dapat ganun ang ating thinking kasi paano naman yung nahawaan at talagang nauwi dun sa matitinding sakit, kawawa naman sila, di ba?
Doc, let me ask you something that I propounded to Doc Consi nung Friday. Well, mahiwagan ng sagot niya kinantahan pa niya kami. But let me ask you the same question po. Kasi,
Ako, hindi ko yata kaya yun. kumanta.
Hindi kayo papakantahin, hindi kayo papakantahin.
kasi
Okay, good.
we were asking her, well, we noticed kasi na yung mga nag-positive for the variants, of course, were mostly overseas workers who had been tested with the PCR test from the origin country and were tested PCR testing here in the destination country as well. At well, mukhang nag-negative sila kasi pinakawalan sila after 14
Pinalipad.
days. And still after that, they tested positive later on for the variants, which apparently they brought in from abroad. So I don't know if does that bring into question yung accuracy ng testing natin. I also bring in the question of well, one issue being raised by Octa Research in the report yesterday. Sabi nila parang 20% ata yung false negatives dun sa mga tests ng PCR. I don't know if that's inaccurate, if that's accurate, but I understand they base their numbers on DOH numbers eh. So is there anything to qualify there? Is there anything that we need to be clear on?
Parang maraming parts yung question. No? So let me try to remember the sequence.
Kasi
so,
si Dukonsi po, kinantahan
yung-
kami ng kinantahan kami ng mahiwaga ang buhay ng tao.
Ganon. Sige, subukan natin sagutin kasi di ko talaga kaya kumanta. So, unang-una, yung question about whether the tests that we're doing are accurate or not. No?
Opo.
So, I think we have to understand na hindi naman lahat ng mga ROFs natin na bumalik, initially nag-negative, saka lang sila nag-test ng positive. Meron naman talagang na-pick up at point of entry or on day 5. Di ba gano'n na yung
Okay,
ating
day 5
process
po.
ngayon?
Day 5 yung,
Oo,
yung
day 5
testing.
we test. So, may mga grupo na nakuha naman natin on day 5, tapos kaya nga natin sila tinest further at saka kinonfine and kinontain. So, for example, yung ating ROF na nanggaling sa Dubai, ganun yung nangyari sa kanya eh. Dumating, nung day 5 nag-test, tapos nalaman natin na positive pala siya for UK variant. So may mga ganong klaseng subgroup. Pero may iba na nakalabas na sa community that eventually naging symptomatic sila at dun sila tinest. So kaya din may question about, okay, sigurado ba tayo na bit-bit nila to galing sa labas? Hindi kaya meron na rin tayong kumakalat dito. So parang mga ganun yung palaisipan kasi natin eh. Siguro I guess that's where Doc Pongki was coming from, yung mahiwaga nga, di ba? Kasi we're not able to say that all of the cases we have are actually coming from abroad. We're starting to pick up some people who don't have a history of travel, but we're still trying to really piece together the story before we come to the conclusion, ay naku, community transmission na yan. Kasi hindi pa rin ganun eh. Hindi pa tayo sigurado. But bottom line, sige sabihin na lang natin, worst case scenario, community transmission. Ano kailangan natin gawin? Balik na naman dun sa sinasabi ng start, di ba? Parang personal protection, intensified public health measures. And then if the authorities feel that this is really not going to be addressed by the current measures, then I guess we have to be ready for the possibility of a lockdown.
Doc, how do we know if the worst case is already coming to pass? Are there hard numbers there that will signal to us na ito na yan, this is the worst case that should be triggering something?
Well, typically, yung healthcare utilization rate is a metric that we refer to, no? And when that approaches the moderate or critical risk values, then it becomes a trigger for deciding whether the quarantine status needs to be elevated.
Doktor, balikan ko lang yung sinabi niyo na we cannot yet rule out na itong ang spike in cases is not due to the variant. At what point kaya, or ang mga 2 weeks pa ba kailangan natin to monitor? Kasi medyo marami-rami na yung cases, di ba? Marami-rami na yung confirm. Ang bilis-bilis yata ng pagkalat ng confirm. So at what point kaya natin masasabi na it's the variants and we should really modify siguro our response, ganon?
The process kasi by which we define the prevalence of these variants is very highly dependent on the tests that we perform and the proportion of tests that return positive for those particular variants that we're looking for. So we don't have the resources. No country has the resource to be able to do whole genome sequencing on each and every positive test that comes back. So our approach has been to design what's called a sampling frame to determine what proportion of positive tests will best represent the most accurate value. So, meron tayong mga percentages of the positive tests that we're saying we should test them. So, parang each run is about 750 samples. The runs are actually done several times a week. No? So, hindi naman dapat abutin ng 2 linggo kasi medyo masyado na yung matagal. Then, I think the fact that we've actually been alerting the public about these detections in the community should also reassure us that we're keeping a very close eye on this. And we just want to balance, no, perhaps the data that we're seeing, not jumping to conclusions that this is the only cause of the problem, making sure that our response is measured, and also reminding people of the really big role that they have to contain, no, to actually address this by containing the spread through their individual compliance.
So even before jumping to conclusions, it's prudent to behave as if andyan na nga yung variant at baka nandito na sa kapitbahay natin.
Yes, exactly. So, Ami, I'd like to pick up on that, no? Parang wala namang pumipigil sa atin na mag-ingat tayo, di ba? So, nasa sa atin pa rin yung ganong klaseng behavior. Kung gusto nating magpanigurado at ano naman ang masama doon, bakit hindi tayo mag-ingat ng doble? Kasi nga, ang bilis-bilis ng pagdami ng kaso.
Doc, just to qualify po, tell me if I'm getting this right. Bale, when we get numbers from the Genome Center, we should not take them as absolute numbers. They are actually representative numbers. Ganun ho ba? Kasi parang you're saying na, of course, you don't test everybody because you can't test everybody naman. So what you do is you take a sampling lamang.
Correct. So ang process kasi nun, we identify positive tests first. And then out of those positive tests, yun yung genome sequence. So parang dalawang stage ang pinagdadaanan nito. Oo. So tapos hindi pa lahat ng mga positive ay papasang matest kaagad kasi you have to have enough of the virus in that particular sample to be able to get a whole genome sequence. So medyo pinipili talaga ng husto yung samples that will qualify for testing, kaya representative number lang siya. But because we feel based on the sampling allocation that this adequately represents the proportion that we're after, then we can make some conclusions as to how likely it is that the variant is actually causing the problem. Now, currently, under 5% yung na-detect nating variants na nag-positive for variants. So parang ang hirap pong sabihin, ay yan na yung pinagmumulan kasi hindi mo man lang masabi na more than 5%, di ba mababa yung numbers eh.
Pero linawin ko lang po yun. So, ibig sabihin, there's no such thing as kung pagbabasihan yung sintomas, that is a suspected variant case. It's not based on the symptoms.
Hindi kasi it behaves the same way. Although, no, I think it's also important to realize that when we decide which tests to run the whole genome sequencing on, sometimes driven din yan by the behavior of the disease. So kung maraming sabay-sabay, so nagka-cluster, kung merong mas increased severity ng disease, kung mabilis yung progression ng disease, no, dinedecide natin i-whole genome sequence yun on the off chance na baka bago to kasi parang iba yung behavior. So, ganun yung mga characteristics na pinipili natin. Pero on the whole, most of the time, they will behave in the same way. So, we can't say, this is variant because of some particular characteristic of the way the disease behaves. It's very hard to conclude that.
So, while waiting for the results to find out kung this is variant-driven nga, is there any particular activity that you would like restricted kahit konti lang? Para lang makapag-ingat-ingat tayo.
Well, siguro from the HPAC lens, no, the things that we pointed out at the start were what we would call enablers, parang things that would allow people to be able to implement the apat-dapat. So sinabi natin, kailangan may magandang ventilation, kailangan may physical distancing. Yung kaya lang talaga natin gawin on our own, I think, is always wearing the mask and shield and controlling our time of exposure, no? Pero yung physical distancing, kung nagko-commute ka tapos siksikan dun sa sinasakyan mo, parang mahirap yata yun, di ba? Tapos yung ventilation, siguro kung meron na tayong public standards that establishments can comply with, maganda rin, makakatulong din yan. So, yung mga factors na yun, pwede pa yung pag-igihan, no? Pwede pa sigurong tutukan ng mga local government units or ng national agencies para whether or not meron tayong increase in cases, na bibigyan natin ng pagkakataon yung mga tao to comply to the best of their ability because the environment allows them to do so.
Okay. Dr. Anna Ong-Lim, Pediatric Infectious Diseases Specialist and a member of the DOH Technical Advisory Team and also the IATF's Technical Working Group on COVID variants. Ma'am, maraming salamat for joining us tonight. Datingan po.
Thank you.
Salamat, Doc.
Thank you.
And that'll be all for this Monday edition of the Chiefs. We hope to discuss here. We'll keep the conversation going. Before we go, a reminder to our viewers, mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. I'm Ed Lingao.
I'm Ami Paminton of the Philippine Star.
I'm Robbie Alampay, and we are One News.